Well, hello, everyone. This is Gary Locke. I'm really pleased to present our latest seminar in the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics seminar. Today's topic is running government like a business. Should we run government like a business? Our previous sessions have focused really on the impact of a variety of different issues on everyday Americans. First was the US-China relationship. The second was on globalism, global trade, and what impact it has on local communities, American companies, and everyday Americans. Is globalization good or bad? How has it affected our communities? Our third was on the impact of artificial intelligence and technology on everyday lives and the impact of today's workers. Will they be losing their jobs over the next 10 years due to the impact of technology, especially artificial intelligence? And I just want to let you know that on our last seminar, 2 weeks from now, actually on a Tuesday, we'll have the Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times columnist, Nicholas Kristof, focusing specifically on the impact, what's happening in society, what's happening in our society as it impacts everyday Americans, the people in rural towns, in small towns, and many parts of our urban areas. Really excited to have that one-on-one conversation with Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times. Today's topic is a little bit dealing with the frustrations and the feelings of everyday Americans. Should government run like a business? And I'd like to invite our participants, our panelists today, Karen Mills and Brian McGowan, if they want to join us, along with Jake Schwartz. But we're really excited to be talking about this topic because people are so frustrated, and there's a lot of angst and anxiety out there, whether it's about globalization, trade, US-China relations, the tariffs, to technology. And certainly people want to know, are they getting good value from their taxpayer dollars? Should government run like a business? And so I'm really pleased to have with us two of my great friends, Karen Mills, who served with me in the Obama administration. She was for 4 years the administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration, really helping businesses get back on their feet. And I certainly know that businesses are challenged now with the impact of the coronavirus. And, that's what the Small Business Administration is doing right now, and trying to hand out some of these grants and help businesses get back on their feet, because we know that when businesses are thriving, they employ people, and those workers are so critical in terms of the success of our country, helping their children and themselves realize the American dream. But Karen Mills right now is a senior fellow at the Harvard Business School, where she's also part of the entrepreneurship faculty. And she's written a lot of books, FinTech, Small Business, and the American Dream. But also she's a longtime venture capitalist and private equity investor, having built companies that range from technology to even my kids' favorites, Annie's macaroni and cheese. And so she's got, and her family comes from a large manufacturing establishment. So she understands business and also the government side. We also have Brian McGowan, who right now is the Chief Executive Officer of Greater Seattle Partners, which is a public-private partnership really focusing on economic growth and competitiveness for my hometown area, the Greater Seattle, Puget Sound region. But many years ago, he was the um, uh, Deputy Secretary for Economic Development and Commerce under Governor Schwarzenegger in California. He's also done this type of work for the city of Atlanta and the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. But I know Brian because he was our U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce when I was the Secretary of Commerce. And he was really the Chief Operating Officer for our Economic Development Administration, which every year distributes anywhere from 200 million to even $1 billion in grants for economic development projects. It could be helping a small community expand their water treatment facility so that an existing company could double in size and hire twice as many employees, or fixing up a small port. A $10 million grant for improvement of a port facility so that there could be more exports of made in USA goods and services to other parts of the world, or a public-private partnership application for a business incubator. So Brian has really been on the front lines of understanding what businesses need, and also running a huge government agency. I want to acknowledge Jake Schwartz, who's been helping us, and he'll be fielding the questions that you may have at the end from all the students and the attendees. Jake is a senior in political science and in international service, and he hails from Philadelphia. So with that, also I want to mention that helping put together today's seminar is Dakota Willenbrock. She can't join us today because she's actually got a class, but she's a sophomore majoring in political science and literature, and she comes from the New York area, Long Island, New York. So without further ado, let's turn it over to Karen Mills. You're on, Karen.
How are you? Nice
Good
to see you,
Karen.
I've just got a leaf blower who just started outside my window, so hopefully you can hear me. I'm going to speak up here. But it's great to be with you, Gary, and I really am delighted to be back because we've had this conversation a number of times. Should government run like a business? And I think you and I actually totally agree, which is the answer is no, but, and there's a big but, there's a lot of things that government can use, which are business techniques, which will make things work better. And what citizens want is they want their government to serve them with public goods in an efficient way with their taxpayer dollar. And they want to have customer satisfaction, just like when you order from Amazon. So what I would say to you is I want to make 3 points about the kinds of techniques, the kinds of business approaches that can, in fact, be adapted, that can, in fact, work in a government context. And the first one that I found when I went to government is that it's very hard for people in government to really focus in on what the outcomes are that they want. It turns out that in business, you've got a bottom line, and you know that you're being measured. There's the profit and the loss and the budgets and the expenses. So what I would do in government is to try to bring some kind of focus on the outcome we were trying to achieve. So people would come in my office with, a PowerPoint deck, and they would say, turn to page 1, and I'd say, stop. First question is, what is the outcome we are trying to achieve? And they'd say, well, turn to, I'll get to that on page 5. I said, no, we're going to not start until we're all clear what we're doing here. What are we trying to get done? And that turned out to be a very hard question for many folks. But once we really understood together what the outcome was, then we could say, okay, well, what does victory look like? And they'd say, well, it's having a meeting in the White House. I said, no, a meeting in the White House is not an outcome. But when you really establish, we want to get more loans into the hands of small businesses who are being crushed by the recession. Okay, how many more? And then you can say, if we know this is victory, how do we reverse engineer success? How do we make milestones so that we know we are on our path to victory? And then when you get to victory, you celebrate and you give some reward and some response and some feedback to people who have worked so hard to get there, so they know, they've achieved their goal. That brings me to the second point, which is all of management, whether it's in government or not, depends on having a great team. And you and I share this philosophy. It's really about the people, not your leadership, but about how the people get motivated. And government is, of course, very different because you don't hire and fire your own people. To a large extent, you have a fantastic civil service, which is there through administration from one to the next. And then you have a layer of political people that you hire on top. What I found is that you really needed to create a diverse team with those that you could hire. And when you created a diverse team of excellent people, which we all know takes some work, you have to decide you're going to build new pipelines into new sources of talent. But when you get that talent, it turns out you become a magnet. I ran an agency, which, as you know, was sort of the bottom of the bottom. It was the 30th out of 30 in best places to work in government. And it was also not very prestigious in the grand scheme of the cabinet, although I thought it was the best, most powerful agency. But we attracted great people. And then Treasury used to come and hire them away from us after a year or two, which I thought was great. Everybody had a new opportunity. But they said, how do you attract this great talent? And I said, having a diverse group that works together with no silos is a really important skill that I learned in the private sector that I brought to government. The last point, I think, is the toughest. You are a big advocate of innovation, and you did a lot with innovation in all of your endeavors. But what I found is that it's very hard for big organizations, government, or even big business to innovate. I've spent my life with entrepreneurs, and I'm teaching entrepreneurship now. So what I've noticed is that we can adapt some of the skills of entrepreneurship into government. I have a colleague at Harvard Business School who wrote a book on this, and he calls it possibility government. Mitch Weiss, he says, if you have a government that just does what it probably can do and what it probably has the resources to do, you get the same pathway that you're on. What you need is to think like an entrepreneur about what could be possible, even if you don't have the resources. That's what all these crazy entrepreneurs do. And how do you think like that inside government? How do you attract the best solutions? And he wrote a book, which I'll give him a plug and show his book about possibility government. And he calls it We the Possibility. Here's the hard part. You have to be able to fail. If you take all these risks, sometimes you fail. And failure in government is not very appreciated. So one of the things to do is to create some safe environments where you can have more innovation and more entrepreneurship and get more solutions. So thinking about the outcome, building important, talented, diverse teams, and keeping your eye on ways to create innovation would be three ways I would adapt business approaches and say they could help us do better in government.
Mhm. So let me ask you, Karen, were there any particular examples where you were able to transform processes or procedures at the Small Business Administration using any of these three principles that you just enunciated?
Yes, well, I would say, part of this is a matter of day-to-day life and activities. But what I found is that this whole notion about really articulating the outcomes, I was very able to create a sense of mission. And what you needed in government, instead of motivating people by, bonuses or overachieving budget, you wanted to make sure that they could achieve the mission. And what we did in the Small Business Administration is make it much more clear what that mission might be. And I think that's
Actually,
where we had the most success.
and oftentimes it takes a long time to actually focus and define that mission, because people aren't really used to thinking about that. They're so used to, well, we just do this, this, and this, and this. When I was in, whether it's as governor of the state, we'd always try to, or, commerce, or even ambassador to China, we were always trying to focus on defining that outcome and then trying to put together just a few charts that would measure um, our progress toward that outcome. And quite frankly, what you measure, trying to figure out what you measure can in fact influence that particular outcome, good or bad, good or bad.
You raise exactly the point that I worry about a lot, because in government, politics gets involved. And what you measure gets influenced by politics. And it's very hard to navigate what really will create the value that is the public good. What is it that the customer really needs from you? And that creating that distinction is something that I think a business minded thinker, rather than a politically minded thinker, can help define better. And it's not that you don't pay attention to politics, that's really, important, but you also really have to have these apolitical metrics, like, money into the hands of small business owners hiring more people. And that is a good place, to focus an agency who, really wants to make things better.
Right. I remember when we were governor, when I was governor, we were embarking on welfare reform under President Clinton. And I had a Republican controlled legislature, and all they wanted was to focus on reducing the caseloads by the end of the 2-year budget cycle. And so the money that they gave me for implementation of all of our public assistance programs assumed a reduction of about 15% by the end of the budget cycle, that the number of people on public assistance had to be down by 15%. And they had all these restrictions built into the budget on how I would operate the program. And so in the state of Washington, we actually have line item veto authority. And so I vetoed out every single condition and um, 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 control that they had on me. So we actually had a complete blank slate. But we then actually turned around and spent several months defining that outcome that you talked about. It would be very easy to, for instance, reduce the number of people on public assistance just by saying, hey, if you have assets over a certain dollar amount, you don't qualify. And that's what a lot of states did. They just made the requirements so onerous that the caseloads dropped immediately. But all that did was raise people or increase the ranks of people in poverty. So our metrics were not just the number of people on public assistance, but were they getting a job? And 2 years after they left public assistance, were they still moving up economically? We looked at job training and retraining programs that we were spending. Were they able to place people? Were they able to place people in good paying jobs? Did they in fact advance even a year after graduation? And focusing on really what is it that we really want? How do we define success beyond just numbers? At the end of the 2-year period, we actually reduced caseloads by 40%. And we were tracking people in terms of their economic gain and making sure they did not come back onto public assistance because they got good job training and retraining and even had childcare and healthcare.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. And, if today we had a blank slate to solve things like income inequality, I would love to have a new measure, which would be shared prosperity. It'd be something like the GDP, but we would say, what percent of Americans can afford to have a certain, have a prosperous life, like the American dream. And if we do, create some measures like this, I think it could organize and orchestrate sort of these multiple activities and programs to say, okay, well, we could probably make some progress on that and have different agencies take a piece of it. Small businesses can be more the path to the American dream. Okay, what do we do to start more businesses? What are the 5 or 6 programs? It could really align, I think. We don't have a strategy for America, and maybe some kind of articulation of these kind of goals in a more sort of tangible way could be helpful.
Great.
And this would be a lesson from business because they do that all the time.
Great. Well, let's bring on our next speaker, Brian McGowan, who really has done some remarkable things in bringing some business principles to the operation of government. Brian, when you took over as the basically chief operating officer at the Economic Development Administration within the U.S. Department of Commerce, you're giving out all these hundreds of billions of dollars of grants every year, 5 million here, 10 million here, 15 million here. Communities would apply for it. If I remember correctly, these communities, most of them got a yes, or a good percentage of them got a yes on their grant proposal, but it took forever to get that yes. And if I remember correctly, at the time that you were there, I mean, so many people were out of work. And if if we're able to give a grant out to double the size of the water treatment facility in a small town, and that would mean a new company would come into town hiring more people, or an existing company would double in size. I mean, even that construction of that renovation of the water treatment facility meant good paying jobs. And those people who are construction workers then shop in malls, eat in restaurants, buy cars, remodel their own homes, stimulates the economy. And of course, when that company grows because they now have more water, or a new company comes, that's also more jobs. What did you find when you took over Economic Development Administration?
Boy, I mean, we found that you needed to know the secret handshake in order to get a grant. So I think over the years, whether intentionally or not, there was kind of a cottage industry that kind of grew up around getting an EDA grant, where you literally would have to hire a consultant that was connected and knew the right people and knew the secret handshake and knew when you could apply. There was a bit of a secret about when you could actually apply and what you could apply for and how much you could apply for. So under your leadership, we kind of blew up that whole process. You remember our Assistant Secretary, John Fernandez, who came from the private sector and was a mayor, said, look, you shouldn't have to know the secret handshake in order to get a grant. And so I think he really kind of drove a private sector perspective into how do we make it certain so people know the process. You shouldn't, again, as a taxpayer, you shouldn't have to have a secret handshake. You shouldn't have to hire a consultant. You should have certainty around when you know you're going to get information back about whether or not your grant application was successful. So we did that. We changed the application process to a rolling application process. So there wasn't any you could apply to a grant anytime you wanted, but we would guarantee within 2 weeks, you would know the results of whether or not your grant was successful.
And what was it before? What was the average waiting time or notification as to whether you were successful or not successful?
I don't remember the exact number, but as a former EDA grant applicant myself, it could be years before you found out whether or not you got a grant. So
I remember correctly, part of the reasoning was that the folks, and these are all career people, well-minded career people, but I think the mentality was that they were always hoping for a better application to come through, and not wanting to make a judgment on the applications that were in front of them.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
and so I think in essence, you also instituted what almost deadlines. You would basically review things within 2 weeks if they came through, if there was a good one coming through. But basically, you'd say, okay, we close it off at the end of every quarter, and certainly by at the close of the quarter within 2 weeks, everyone would have a decision, yes or no.
Yeah, yeah, we wanted certainty around the process. So it was a trying to think more like the private sector. And I agree with Karen. I think in certain instances, government should act more like the private sector and business practices, but they're fundamentally different things. They can't always do that. And in some cases, the private sector is much better at doing things than government should. And that's why there's a gazillion-dollar government contracting industry, because government recognizes that. Um, One of the examples I think of as I was thinking about this conversation is, just watching what SpaceX did, right? And a little shameless plug for Seattle. All those satellites that have been launched, are actually the majority of those satellites are being built here in the greater Seattle region. But there's a company that kind of transformed the satellite launch industry. It was really expensive to launch a satellite. Um, Profit motive caused that company to think differently about how do we reuse those rockets so we can land them and use them again, because that was a significant cost. So in that case, it's like, yeah, the private sector was better at doing that. I think government recognized that and contracted and put incentives out there for companies to be able to provide that kind of service. So, the EDA was a small example of how we were trying to, just as you remember, we were in the throes of a recession and we were trying to get money out more quickly. Right before this conversation, you and I were talking, the EDA's now got $3 billion to get out. And, we saw some, difficulties in getting the PPP money out. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how government can think more like private sector and work at the pace of the private sector and get this new stimulus money out quicker than it did before.
The key, though, to trying to bring business principles to government, or even a public-private partnership like the organization that you lead in terms of economic development, how do you motivate people? How do you blow up the systems or completely revolutionize things the way that even Karen was talking about earlier?
You know, that's very difficult. As Karen mentioned, I think a lot of people don't realize that when a new administration comes in, you have appointees at the top layer, and folks below that are career people who have been there for years and were running systems that were there before. So they're, again, you go back to people who think you can just go from the private sector and go into government and just kind of implement the way you did in the private sector. That's one of the fundamental barriers to doing that, is that there's systems and procedures and people in place that you don't have full control over. As you remember, Gary, I mean, if it wasn't easy to move an employee out of the organization or move the employee within an organization, you were kind of stuck a little bit with what you had if you didn't want a big old fight and want to try to focus on getting things done. So, for us, it was really trying to motivate by, and I love what Karen said, because I believe the same thing, start with the end in mind and reverse engineer it. But what we really tried to do is, again, we were in the depths of a recession, and we wanted to make sure that our people knew that the work you do is affecting people's lives. Like, you can get people back to, people were suffering in 2011 when we showed up. They were losing their houses. They didn't have jobs. They were losing hope. And so we were really trying to, let people understand that you're part of a bigger thing here. This is not just a piece of paper that you're marking up and shuffling around. That piece of paper reflects hundreds or if not thousands of jobs. So, your job as an American is to, try to get this out as quickly as possible and be a part of the solution.
Great, great. So let's bring back Karen and Jake. I think we actually have a poll question we'd like to pose and have our audience participate, and then like to get the reactions of both Karen and Brian to that first poll question. Jake, take it away. All right, I'll just read it. It says, in the private sector, commission and or bonus pay is often used to incentivize efficiency and success among employees. Should the public sector workers also receive commission and or bonus pay? Yes, no, I don't know. All right, let's go fill it out quickly. Yes, no, I don't know. Should government employees get commission and or bonus pay? Oh, okay. All right. Our host and our panelists cannot vote. Okay.
That's not fair.
All right. So, all right, Jake, what's the result? Oh, people say yes.
Wow.
11 responded. Yes. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. What do you think about that, Karen? I mean, how would we give a bonus pay, let's say, to a prison worker?
I understand why everybody said yes. It would not be at the top of my priority list. And the reason is, what I found is that in the civil service, you were able to do some things with special bonuses and recognitions, but that the motivation, in the government, the pay is okay, the benefits are quite good, and people are not there for the pay. They are, or the benefits, they're there for the mission. And if they are talented and they really want to, be in a pay for performance environment, they can find that, that there's opportunity for them to be in pay for performance. But I had a lot of really talented people who were not poorly compensated, and they had good benefits and very, very good, retirement and healthcare and other things. They really were there because they believed in the mission. And last week, I taught a class at Harvard Business School for State Department career employees all around the world. And I think somebody had sponsored it so that public servants could come and get leadership education. And once again, I found that these folks who are living in, some of them are in, war-torn countries at the time. You can never really compensate people for the service that they are doing. And if you want to say you did a really, better job than the other one, I think giving honest feedback, telling people what's expected will do a whole lot more than just in the federal government. I don't think this is I think this is a place where I feel differently about the private sector, where I believe in this kind of compensation. In the public sector, it wouldn't be the first thing I would do.
Mm-hmm. Brian, your thoughts, quick thoughts?
My answer to this is kind of like my answer to the overall question is yes and no. I've worked for, state and city governments, but I did get incentive pay. And as Karen mentioned, in the federal government, you can provide some incentive pay, but there's lots of restrictions on that. But when I was in Atlanta, I was the CEO of the Economic Development Authority for the city. And the Economic Development Authority for the city was actually set up outside of city government. So it was actually an authority created by the state of Georgia, separate and outside of City Hall. And it was specifically created that way because our primary client was the private sector. So our agency provided incentives to companies to get them to move there. We ran a revolving loan fund program for small businesses. We worked with developers to incentivize them to build affordable housing. And it was kind of city council recognized that if that structure was going to operate within city government, it was not going to be able to move at the speed of business. So I was the CEO of an agency. We had 70 or so people. We had a separate governing board, but we weren't constricted or restricted by the politics of City Hall. We were kind of separate from that. And I worry, with bonuses within government structures, I would worry that they would be subject to political influence. But I had a bonus, and my senior team had bonus. Another quick example of how that worked is we were tasked with providing or issuing the bonds for the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Now, the state of Georgia could have issued those bonds, and the city of Atlanta could issue those bonds, but they asked us to do it. Mayor Reed asked us to do it because we had the authority to do it, but we could move more quickly. And in fact, my agency received an incentive for every bond it issued. So we were out there hunting for opportunities to provide bonds for developers and stadiums and things like that, because we would make money. Our agency would actually make money off of that. So my team was constantly out there trying to, and there were options. There were other authorities that could issue bonds. So we were incentivized to be super customer friendly and super quick in our reactions. And so I think incentives can work, but in certain limited situations.
I think one of the big differences between, I'm kind of open to somehow rewarding employees, government employees. I'm right now an interim president of a community college, and how can we perhaps figure ways to provide some incentives for change in curriculum, or serving typically underserved and marginalized communities, or increasing the achievement and completion rates of some of our students of color. So I am kind of interested in trying to create those incentives. And the question, though, is, are bonuses or commissions the proper way to go? Because unlike business, where bonuses are oftentimes given, the bonuses are given to the top managers. But in an organization in government, let's say a city agency where you're cleaning the streets, or all the people trying to help folks get off of public assistance, you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of rank and file employees. People who work, for instance, in the patent office, or people who work in the Census Bureau. Government is already strapped for funds, and to have a meaningful bonus or commission would be very, very, very expensive, unless you're just talking about $10 per employee or $100 per employee per year. And so then the question is, are there better ways in which we can incentivize and recognize and motivate employees in the government sector?
Absolutely. And this is where I think we had a lot of fun at the SBA. I don't know if you know what challenge coins are, but in the military, folks who, commanders and others have a coin for their domain. And there's a whole ritual. Well, we did so much activity with the military between government contracting and SBIR that someone had challenge coins made for the administrator of the SBA. And it was the first time they had existed. And to give a challenge coin to someone is to recognize that they have done something outstanding. So we, I use them particularly in the field. And you would see people, sort of months later, years later, come back and have these displayed, in their office as a whole point of pride, and tell the story about what it was that they did that, got them the challenge award. Another, I think this is reinforcing, because once again, you don't want to be telling everyone as the leader what they should be doing. You want your team and your folks all the way down the line to be knowing and celebrating, striving after the goals that we all would have as part of the mission. And then feeling good about the recognition they got and telling other people what it was that got them that recognition. That's how the culture changes inside the organization. I think having a special high potential group that gets other rewards like training. So this secretary's group that the State Department sent to Harvard Business School, that's a pretty valuable education. The private sector pays a lot of money for that Harvard Business School training. And these folks had it underwritten by a donor and for the betterment of, our civil service. And they were very, very talented and very, very motivated. So I think having access to those kind of rewards, it's maybe more compelling than, $500.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I started at Washington State, and we're going to incorporate back at the college where I am now, is a savings incentive program where if an agency or unit achieves their goals, but does it in a more cost-effective manner and actually saves money, we're going to let them use some of that money, carry it over into the next fiscal year. So we get away from this mad rush of, spend it or lose it. Got to spend every penny before the end of the fiscal year closes. And sometimes that means wasteful spending. But we're going to let you, if you actually achieve your goals, but in a more efficient way, or if you're always a money losing proposition, you actually lose less money while accomplishing your goals. We're going to let you keep it to be spent in an orderly fashion the next year on things that the employees want, whether it's more training, technology, upgrades to their equipment, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, we got another question.
Real quick comment on that. That actually reminds me of what we were doing at Invest Atlanta, where we literally could earn commissions off, deals that we were doing as an authority. The motivation of the staff was honestly every year, we received a certain subsidy from the city council, from the city of Atlanta. Well, the more incentive we were able to commission, we were able to generate from the bonds and the work that we did, the less money we'd have to ask for from the city, which is, you can imagine, it's painful to go to the city every year and ask for money, and they're dealing with their budget cuts. So it was very motivational for the team. The other thing about those dollars is that they were unrestricted. A lot of the dollars that we received were for certain things. Those dollars we could use for anything. And we would actually put it in a bucket, and we would, have, team discussions about, look, guys, we can spend this money on anything. What do we want to use this money for? And to Gary, your point about, incentive structure for employees, you're right. It does get very expensive because you might be able to do that at the executive level, but when you drive it down to an entire organization, very, very difficult to do that.
Great. Jake, what's our other question or poll question? All right. Here's the thing. The U.S. Post Office has been losing about $8 billion a year for the last 10 years. And so it's subsidized by U.S. taxpayers. A lot of people say, hey, run government like a business, let them compete like a private sector. Well, so I went to FedEx and I actually said, how much would it cost to mail this birthday card to my son in LA? The longest time frame, not express. And they said, well, actually, it's $11.50 to mail it, or even a letter, whether it's crosstown or to Los Angeles. So the question is, if we were to privatize the U.S. Post Office, we'd have to be paying almost $11.50 just to send a birthday card or a simple letter across town. Would you be willing to pay $11.50 to send that birthday card, or the check to the dentist, paying your bill at $11.50 to make the post office run like a business? Yes or no? Yes or no?
No.
Whoa. Okay. So, Karen and Brian, if you were, instead of the head of the Small Business Administration or running Economic Development Administration, what business principles might you want to bring to the post office? Or do we just assume that, that's one of the functions of government, and certain functions of government are going to lose money, whether it's Amtrak or building highways, they don't recoup, they don't pay for themselves. So what do we do?
I think, Gary, that was a bit of a trick question, right? Because, is it possible to have the post office run for less than $11.50 for a letter across town? Is that the real cost? You know, would that really be the real cost? And, you know, there are costs where we know it's a public good. And the question really is, how much are you willing to subsidize an entity that is delivering in the most efficient way possible that public good? And it's just too expensive for people to drive on a highway and pay the real cost of the highway. And if we really want high-speed rail, we're going to have to subsidize it, because it's just a lot of land and a lot of infrastructure and a lot of, you know, fixed costs. So we have a lot of things in this country that we think are public goods and that we're ready to subsidize and not charge the customer full price. I think with the post office, what everybody is annoyed about is that there's a sense somehow that it's the, you know, $5,000, $10,000 toilet seat again in DOD, where somehow costs have gotten out of hand and government really can't source properly. So there's two questions at hand. One is, when do you want to say, I will do everything possible to source efficiently, to run my operation efficiently, but at the end, I am going to have this much layer of public subsidy, and that's what tax dollars pay for. And on the other hand, you might say, and I'm willing to pay that because that is part of the public purpose of government. And I think that was certainly true in the beginning. Having the infrastructure of mail was a public good.
Yeah.
Now we have both private sector comparison, and we have, you know, a sense that somebody else can provide a better customer experience, right? And if you really look under it, is getting mail every single day in your post office box worth it to the American consumer? And if so, in what areas? And what is the service, the customer service we want to maintain? And then reverse engineer all the way back to, what should it really be costing? And if we're going to put, you know, postal employees out of work, we have some responsibility for that too.
Great. Hey, we got some questions from the audience and from our students. So I'm going to turn it over to Jake if you want to come on and ask that first question.
Sure. We have a question from David from London that says, what do you feel is the best way to approach defining more complex long-term social outcomes that the government may wish to achieve, such as mental health, general well-being, and how do you maintain being aspirational in your goals without being unrealistic?
Brian, you had to deal with some of that when you were tasked to the White House to respond to the oil spill disaster in the Gulf. So you want to try that one?
Yeah, and I think maybe I'd like to use an example from this region, actually, because again, I go back to what Karen said, starting with the end in mind. And so my organization has been tasked, as a matter of fact, Ambassador Locke is one of the co-chairs of this huge task force for economic recovery for the region. And one of my criticisms of government is that in my profession in economic development is that we don't set, goals, numbers, like what's the needle we're trying to move. I think a lot of people in my profession do a lot. It's like activity. Let's just do a lot of stuff and assume that something's happening, something good is happening. So we just went through a long process with a very large task force of over 250 people to really identify how many people in this region are out of work, how many are in low wage jobs, how many are underemployed, and then how many new entrepreneurs, women and people of color, do we need to start high growth businesses in this region to be the best performing region in America. So we have 4 numbers. They're big numbers: 70,000, 50,000, 55,000, and 4,000. But we know within those categories, women and people of color have been affected worse than anybody during this recession and this pandemic. So we've now narrowed it down to the small number and have determined that if we focus on that small number and we can move the needle on that small number, it's going to help everybody in all the other sectors. So those numbers are 4,500, 5,000, 6,000, and 1,000. And we also know that in order to help those folks upskill, get a better job or start a business, that's going to cost about $100 million over 5 years. So what we tried to do is break it down in a very, very knowable chunks. And then we're building coalitions of organizations throughout the region that are going to work together to actually try to move the needle on those numbers. So it's not this kind of nebulous, we're trying to do something good for everybody and we're not measuring it. Part of the reason we're doing this, to get back to the topic, is we want private sector dollars to be co-invested with public sector dollars. And one of the complaints or concerns I've gotten here and where I came from a lot of our big CEOs say, look, we're willing to write checks. We just feel like it's going into a black hole. We don't know what's the result. Like, they're used to, anybody works with a Fortune 500 CEO, I've worked with a lot. They're used to running a big machine where they put an input on this side of the machine and a certain thing comes out at the other end. So we tried to create a process that was business-like thinking, that we could show what the return on investment would be from an investment from a private company.
Great. What's our next question, Jake?
Sure. I have a question. Hypothetical, let's say an administration decides to try to run the US government like a business. What would the single largest concern be in your mind of changing the framework through which government runs? Many critics would say that it's the underlying principle of government, serve the people at all costs, while the more efficient business model is shaped around profit maximization at all costs. Aren't those two inherently contradictory?
Well, once again, you need to adapt business methods if you're going to institute them. But the biggest risk is unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And we see this all the time. As Gary, you were just pointing out, what if you want to reduce the number of people, served who have this issue? Really, very often, if you have a very successful program, you increase the number of people served, because people will sort of come out of the woodwork. So mental health is a great example of that. If you say, I want to reduce my goal is to reduce the people who have mental health problems, and we're going to measure success by doing all these things and see how many fewer issues we have. Well, you might find out that the more accessible this mental health, people whose problems have been hidden or they didn't, want to come get treatment until it was really a problem, now they're showing up. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And if you say, oh my God, the program is failing, and then you cut it off, but really it was a good program, you've misunderstood. You've misunderstood your metrics. So I think blindly applying sort of business metrics or cost savings don't really translate. You have to overlay, because you have to really continually think, this is what entrepreneurs do. What is my customer really want? What is going to satisfy the need, the pain point that they have? And if we focus on that kind of thinking in government, what is the purpose of the public good, and are we helping? Then I think we might avoid some of those unintended consequences.
And I'll add that I think there's an equity issue here. So as Karen mentioned earlier, private sector has a profit motive, and they need to do things that actually help them make money. We see, for example, criticism of there's the push to have private companies run prisons. I actually have an acquaintance who's had some legal problems, drug problems for many years, and he's going through a process right now where it clearly advantages people who have money. So it's the criminal justice system is trying to do cost recovery and act like a private sector business, but that means if you can hire a better lawyer. In fact, this person had to hire a consultant to create a video for him, and he makes $40,000 a year to create a video of why he shouldn't go to jail. Like, that shouldn't exist, because that's going to clearly advantage somebody who can hire a videographer and create a a great video. So I think that this idea of business practice within criminal justice system can be perverted at some point. It can really kind of cause very negative outcomes and put, the disadvantage even more at a disadvantage than they already are.
If I could follow up on the question from David Borland in London. Part of his question was, how do you be aspirational in your goals without being unrealistic? I think that for government, we should really have super high stretch goals, almost impossible goals, and realize that we're not always going to be successful, that no one, we're not perfect as parents, as spouses, when to buy and sell stock. Not every team can win a game. One team wins, one team loses. But we should really have super high stretch goals, if nothing else, to force people to blow up the system and to come at it from a totally different lens and start almost from scratch, instead of just tinkering around the edges with what the systems and the processes we've inherited. I think Karen was talking about, defining that outcome and reverse engineering. Brian talked about completely changing sometimes this 20-month long process to process or give approvals or denials to a $5 million grant at the Economic Development Administration. I think the key is recognizing that even if you have a super high, almost impossible stretch goal, people aren't always going to make it. And that you praise the employees for trying hard, working ethically and in good faith. And again, reinforcing the message that it's okay to take risk. It's okay to be innovative and daring, recognizing you're not going to hit that home run every single time.
Right.
I think
Government should try to do hard things.
Yeah.
And it should have big stretch goals. This is what Mitch Weiss said. And, we the possibility government, we want our government to do hard things and to have big goals. But we also want to know if we're on track. So we have to find those milestones and say, oh, no, don't just wish and hope and throw money away.
Right.
Let's measure some progress along the way.
Right.
Gary, I specifically remember when you gave that speech at the Department of Commerce. I was in the audience, and it was exciting. And the way I kind of interpreted that in subsequent jobs that I had was that I would give permission to my employees to spend a certain number of hours a week just coming up with new ideas, working on a new program. And then every year we would give an award out. And to Karen's point, earlier, that, awards and rewards in government matter because people aren't there for the money. They're there, to advance their careers. They're there to actually do something good for the community. And so that actually became a really exciting thing for our employees, that they were allowed to spend time, kind of a skunk works, come up with a new idea, a new program, a different way of doing things.
Well, I know that in a lot of the organizations that I've led, we purposely set goals where we knew they would fail, where they could not achieve the goals, but we also wanted them to see that we were going to support them, praise them, and that we were not going to cut them off at the knees or lop off their heads because they did not reach their goal, because we wanted to clearly send that new paradigm shift, that message of a paradigm shift to our government employees. And so that was really, really helpful. Our time is up, but I just want to close by one thing. I've always had this motto, and actually it was encapsulated by an expression from Thomas Edison, who actually took it from a Japanese proverb. And I think it really encapsulates what both of you, Brian and Karen, were talking about. And Edison said this: vision without execution is hallucination. Vision without execution is hallucination. A lot of people have great ideas, whether in the private sector or even in government, but focusing on outcomes, metrics, measurements, how you measure, what you measure, and really spending time helping people achieve that vision is the key to success. Otherwise, it's all hallucination. Anyway, our time is up. I want to thank Jake for helping facilitate this, and also Dakota, who put together a lot of these questions and helped us get ready for this, and inviting students and alumni and friends of American University from around the world to attend this seminar. But thanks so much to Karen Mills. We had a great time together working on economic recovery during the Obama years, and you did a fantastic job helping people and revitalizing the Small Business Administration. Your agency now is certainly that you've left, that you've passed on, is now going to be in the center of this new $2 trillion rescue plan. And Brian, you were so incredible in terms of helping distribute money after the Gulf oil spill and helping communities get back on their feet. You're doing a great job in the Seattle area. Thank you for your contributions, and thank you all. Jake, thank you very much for helping stepping in for Dakota. 2 weeks from now, actually on a Tuesday, we're going to have Nicholas Kristof, a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist with the New York Times, and really exciting to hear. I'm really excited to hear what he has to say. So with that, thank you all very much. Thank you, Karen. Thank you,
Thank
Brian.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jake.